Hello and good morning. I'm Arthur Espinoza. I'm the Executive Director of the DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities. And I suppose that by now you've had the musical revelry up front, you've had a little bit of caffeine, and you just had some great step dancing. Let's hear it again for the artists that were here today. So you should be sufficiently energized for the day, as am I. I'm so honored to be here, part of Vision DC, and the start of Cultural DC's Arts and Urban Innovation Summit. A few people have asked me, what is that? What's it about? Well, I explained it like this. It's a bit like going to the optometrist, and you're not really sure what you need, but you know you've got to sharpen your vision. You've got to hone it in focus. So today, let that guide you as you think about what today is all about. This event comes at a pivotal moment in DC's history. The District of Columbia continues to enjoy a burgeoning arts and humanities scene with development projects going on across the city. There are over 70 development projects currently underway in DC, from Ward 4, the 66-acre Parks at Walter Reed project, to the vast Southwest Waterfront development project that you see, and many of you probably drove by on your way in here today. The district is uniquely positioned now to harness the creative industries to give greater strength, vibrancy, and economic resiliency to our beautiful city. I'm hopeful that today you'll make discoveries throughout the summit, remembering that what starts as inquiry often leads to greater possibilities and solutions. I invite you to approach today considering how we can use the intersection of policy, art, culture, place, business, and people to drive economic development, address social inclusivity, and encourage cultural prosperity. And while we're at it, let's not forget to ask what active roles everyone from all walks of life throughout the district can play in this evolution. Today you're going to hear some big questions being asked, and while it's possible some solutions may be found by 5 o'clock, is that when it ends? This is really an opportunity to focus on using the day to jumpstart long-term relationships across the various fields represented here today. Let's navigate new networks and continue to seek answers to the productive questions that creatively drive DC's growth and inclusive prosperity. And with that as your framework for the day, I am pleased to begin the day by introducing Vision DC's keynote speaker, Jamie Bennett. Since 2014, Jamie has been the Executive Director of ArtPlace America, a partnership among 16 foundations, 8 federal agencies, and 6 financial institutions, working to position arts and culture as a core sector of community planning and development. Through their support of creative placemaking projects, ArtPlace helps strengthen the social, physical, and economic fabric of communities. Previously, Jamie served as the Chief of Staff at the National Endowment for the Arts and at the New York Department of Cultural Affairs. He's provided strategic counsel at the Agnes Gund Foundation and worked in fundraising at the Museum of Modern Art, the New York Philharmonic, and Columbia College. His past nonprofit affiliations have included serving on the board of directors of Art 21 and the Here Arts Center, the Foot in the Door Committee of the Merce Cunningham Dance Foundation, and the Associates Committee of Studio in a School. And I'm fairly certain that he's 1 degree of separation from Kevin Bacon. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jamie Bennett.
Thanks so much. All right. Good morning. How is everyone? Good. Excellent. So I was talking with Edgar Doby backstage, and we were talking about sort of theaters as anchor institutions. And in general, when you're having a conversation about anchor institutions, everyone talks about eds and meds, right? Universities and hospital systems. And the reason we talk about those as anchor institutions is place-based enterprises aren't easy to move around. They have big employment, and they have a big impact on the local economy. Cultural organizations do that same thing, but the big difference, and one of the ideas that I'd love for you to hold in your head for the next little bit, is that unlike hospitals and universities, cultural institutions radically and actively welcome people in, right? In general, most of us, our goal is to spend as little time as possible in our universities derive their value from how many people they exclude from having an education, right? My 5% acceptance rate is the thing that I'm proudest of. So I want to sort of hold that in our head, that cultural institutions are anchor institutions that radically welcome. And what I'd love to sort of, as I was preparing to sort of think what we should talk about today, we're a room full of people who are some combination of art and real estate, right? So what does it mean that we're going to talk about? That means we're going to talk about gentrification, right? But one of the things that I've sort of begun confessing publicly is I actually am not interested in having conversations about gentrification. And that is I think it's the wrong framing of the problem. The problem isn't where and where not the gentry live. The problem is actually around involuntary displacement, right? And that's the policy framework that we can actually enter into. But in order to have a meaningful conversation about that, it's important to understand the kinds of involuntary displacement, right? There's physical displacement. We're all generally familiar with eminent domain. If a public official decides there's a use for property, they can physically remove someone, physically remove a home, physically remove a business. There's financial displacement. That's the one that we've had a lot of conversations about. And during the 4 years I lived in DC, it was certainly a hot topic here. I've lived in a neighborhood for a very long time. It's been underinvested, which is one of the reasons I've been able to afford to live there. All of a sudden, property values are going up, and I can no longer afford to be there. I'm being financially displaced. And some of the most important work anywhere in the country is being done by the 11th Street Bridge project in Lisk here in Washington, D.C., and I know that they're speaking later, so I'm not going to talk a lot about that. The kind of displacement that I actually is cultural displacement, and it's the one that we almost never get to. And I didn't really understand this concept until my colleague Manuel Pastor was telling me about a neighborhood in Los Angeles called Echo Park. And Echo Park is, I think, 93% Spanish-speaking. And the city decided to build a major new public space. And as they were building that major new public space, they put up zero signage in Spanish, right? Who was that space being built for? Who was the assumed user, right? And I don't just pick on the West Coast. And in New York City, we have a very complicated history with stop and frisk. I'm an white male who puts on a coat and tie every day when I leave the house. I've never been stopped, I've never been frisked. When I'm hanging out in public space, not doing much of anything, I'm seen as, or better yet, I'm seen as activating, right? If I was a male of color, I would have been stopped. I probably would have been frisked. If I was hanging out in space, not doing much of anything, my presence would be read as loitering, right? So there are two concepts within cultural displacement that I think we should hold in our heads. And they're the difference between comfort and safety, and the difference between behavior and identity, right? And there are many situations when there's a community that's had a way of existing for time and new people enter it, they're not always comfortable with what's happening in that community and they feel unsafe. But those are two different concepts. In addition, we sometimes confuse behavior and identity, right? Today, I think there are a lot of us in this house who would identify as hipster neo-urbanists, right? And we know the concept of parking day, right? You take a parking space in front of your house, you take a parking space in front of your building, you put up a folding chair, you play some music, and you reclaim the space, right? That's pop-up urbanism, that's tactical urbanism, that's something we're really excited about, right? In Brooklyn, we've been hanging out in front of our houses listening to music for a very long time, and people are calling the cops on us, right? So I think it's very important to not confuse who's doing it and what they're doing. And one of the sort of more startling realizations that I've had over the last 3 years in this job is that I do not believe that a community has an authentic identity, right? I actually believe that communities have multiple identities and that they're collections of histories, right? Some of them in Harlem, in my hometown. And we all know that Harlem has an authentic identity, right? What is the authentic identity of Harlem? It's Jewish, right? That's why there's Stars of David in the architecture, right? That gets a nice giggle from everyone except the Lenape people who've been eradicated and erased from the history of Harlem. A lot of our work in place-based philanthropy and a lot of our work in organizing is around this notion of a shared identity. Is that a community is a group of people who are the same, and I can treat them as the same, right? I can come into an African-American neighborhood and I know how to organize it because everyone has a grandmother who goes to church, right? That's never been the case, and it's less the case these days than it was ever before. So I would say rather than thinking about shared identity, we need to begin thinking about social cohesion. And through some investments that we were making at ArtPlace, we had an opportunity to visit with 24 place-based organizations all across the country working in all sorts of contexts. And every single one of them said that what we need more than anything else is social cohesion. And every one of them said in a tone of voice that you would say the sun will come up tomorrow, said that arts and culture can deliver that for us. But none of them was particularly clear on what they meant by social cohesion, right? We knew that it meant not being afraid of the people in your community, but what did it actually mean? I would posit that it maybe means having empathy for the people in your community who are not like you, who come from a different heritage, who come from a different history. And ideally, it would mean having curiosity about those people, so that when I'm confronted with someone who is not like me, I want to lean in and know more. And arts and culture can play a pretty vital role in connecting across difference. There are three colleagues that I'd love to point to. The first is Alika Wally, who's an anthropologist at the Field Museum in Chicago. And her work has been around the informal arts, the kind of things that are likely to be a part of our everyday lives, right? Drumming circles, singing in a church choir, book groups, that sort of stuff. And what she's discovered is that arts participant acts as a master identity. Doing art together creates a shared identity that transcends age, race, ethnicity, gender, socioeconomic status, country of origin. People who do art together connect in a way that is durable beyond the art experience. And Dr. Wally was looking at immigrant and first-generation people in Chicago who were meeting in the parks through drumming circles. And what was fascinating about this is that you had people from different cultural heritages performing their unique heritage and bonding with each other across group. This actually meant I didn't need to become more like you to become more closely bonded with you. I could reinforce our difference and at the same time become closer. So she's actually positing that arts and culture is one of the only pathways to an integrated society that doesn't involve assimilation. In a similar way, my colleague Joan Jeffrey was looking at aging visual artists in New York City. And she also discovered that Arts Maker works in the same way. Visual artists, older visual artists in New York, have larger social networks and more intergenerational contacts than other New Yorkers. Why is that? Because whenever two painters meet, they talk about turpentine. Right? It doesn't matter that one is 17 and one is 70. They've got a shared identity and they come together across difference. And so visual artist is actually the ideal model for aging in place. And before we get too precious with ourselves, I think it's important to remember that not only art and culture does this. Our colleague Daniel Silver wrote a white paper called God, Yoga, and Karate. Which of our cultural organizations, which of our cultural institutions organize like people together, and which of them organize unlike, right? And God and yoga are very good at organizing similar people, right? What is the most segregated hour in this country? 10 a.m. on Sunday morning, right? Karate was the institution that he found that was best at organizing people orthogonally across group. If you go to the dojo, you have every kind of person who's in a community. So I think it's really important that we remember what does that well. But it's also important to remember that sometimes those of us in art and culture get it wrong. Now, as Arthur said in my bio, I spent 10 years working at the Museum of Modern Art, so I'm allowed to pick on MoMA, none of you are. And one of the things that MoMA does best, MoMA does better than anyone I see, is letting everyone in the world know exactly how much money you have from the minute you walk in the door. Right? Did you spend 6 hours standing in line for Free Fridays? Did you come in through the trustee entrance? Are you going through the members' lounge? Are you waiting online for the $25 ticket? Right? That's not the kind of orthogonal community organizing that we need. Instead, I would point us to the library, right? The library, unlike MoMA, Mrs. Rockefeller and a homeless gentleman both show up through the same door. They present the same card at the same desk and receive the exact same level of service, right? So I think it's really important that we think about our cultural spaces and what the signals they're sending are. And most times, I want to be absolutely clear about this, most times arts and culture can help, even murals. And I'm working on I've decided I should do a memoir about my time at ArtPlace that should be called Confessions of a Creative Placemaker. And my number one confession is that I used to hate murals. And part of it was not the mural's fault, right? But this is how people understood the role of artists in community. You had a vacant lot in an inner city, someone put up a picture on a wall, and that's what it was all about. But my predecessor in this job was a woman called Carol Coletta. And Carol was interviewing then mayor of Newark, Cory Booker. And she said to him, Mr. Mayor, being mayor must be an awfully difficult thing. Every day you wake up and your inbox is filled with nothing but difficult things. What's the single hardest thing about being mayor? And then Mayor Booker thought for a minute. And eventually he said, getting people to believe that tomorrow can be different. Right? And what murals do, better than almost anything I've seen, is get people to believe that tomorrow can be different. Right? I've lived for generations in the same neighborhood. Has ever created a place that I might want to actively choose to spend time. My neighborhood's been marked by people telling me I should get out of it, get out of it, get out of it. And all of a sudden, this is a way for us to achieve some element of visual equity, for us to achieve to exercise some sort of collective efficacy, and for us to come together and really believe that it doesn't have to be the way it was yesterday. So there are two other projects that I just want to mention quickly because this doesn't work just outside, it also works inside. In New York City, I picked on my city and I picked on a museum, so I want to now say nice things about my city and a nice museum. This is the Sugar Hill Museum of Art and Storytelling. And the building you see in the lower left-hand corner is permanent supportive housing for formerly homeless families. And it was developed by Broadway Housing Communities by a woman called Ellen Baxter, who's been working on ending homelessness and generational poverty in Upper Manhattan since about 1981. And in that building, which was designed by David Adjaye, the architect who did the new African American History Museum here in DC, at the center of it, she put a museum of art. First, the classic urban planning traffic play, right? Without some sort of public space at the center of the building, it ran the risk of becoming only a place that formerly homeless families went. It ran the risk of becoming a marked space separate from the rest of the community. But with a public space at the center of it, I've complicated the pattern of foot traffic. A resident may be walking in, an artist may be walking in, a curator, a tourist, a teacher, a student, anyone may be walking in and out. So that physically integrates that building and its community with the larger city. The reason it's a museum of art and storytelling is that the act of telling a story, of creating narrative, plays a very important role in trauma recovery, right? And one of the conditions of being homeless, particularly if you're a young person, is that it's traumatic. And one of the definitions of trauma is a fact pattern that doesn't make sense, right? I am a child living in the wealthiest country in the world, and I'm sleeping in a car and I'm eating out of a trash can. That doesn't make sense, it's traumatic. And the act of telling a story is about making sense of fact patterns and synthesizing world experience. So this is also an investment in the psychological health of its community. And that's, if anyone's interested here in DC, the National Endowment for the Arts has actually been working in the same vein with the Department of Defense with men and women who are returning from Iraq and Afghanistan and are living with post-traumatic stress and traumatic brain injury. The last project that I wanted to mention just briefly, and then return the stage to the next panel, is a project that takes place in Takoma Park. And everyone here knows Takoma Park, yes? It's a first-ring suburb. And what is the definition of a first-ring suburb? It's a place that thousands of people live and millions of people want to spend as little time as possible. Right? It's just between me and work, it's just between me and home. And over the past 50 years, every single decision about the built environment in Takoma Park has been made for the people who want to spend as little time as possible there. Right? So the residents, led by Dance Exchange, extraordinary group in Takoma Park, decided enough that the street should be for them too. So they decided to partner the choreographers and the dance makers with the traffic engineers, and they decided to redesign New Hampshire Avenue. And the reason was they wanted to marry two kinds of knowledge, right? Traffic engineers think about bodies moving through space, but they tend to only think about automobile bodies, and they tend to only judge their work on efficiency. Choreographers, dancers, also think about bodies moving through space, but they tend to think about the human body, and they tend to think about the quality of the experience, right? So epistemologically, they thought that by bringing together these two kinds of knowledge, dance maker and traffic engineer, they could create a public space that both accommodated the automobile body and accommodated the human body, that got people where they needed to go and also invited people to linger. So with that, I invite us to spend the rest of this day thinking about those kinds of partnerships. How can the artist and the non-artist come together and have 1 + 1 = 3? Thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to spending the rest of the day with you.